My name is Hillary Dunn. I'm an attorney here at the Disability Law Center. This discussion is focused on the needs and services of transition-age students 14 to 22 who likely will look to the Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, which is formerly known as the Department of Mental Retardation. They're going to be looking there for their adult services. The population that we're talking about, these students are also likely going to have what is called a severe or profound intellectual disability. They may be nonverbal, have behavioral issues, or other complicated needs. Please note that this is not meant to be an exhaustive or fully inclusive discussion. I'm just trying to raise some issues and provide some awareness so that hopefully you can start planning as early as possible. The federal law requires that schools provide transition services. This should include services focused on improving academic and functional achievement to facilitate the move from school to any employment opportunities, adult services, and community participation. It should be individualized and, among many other things, include community experiences, and when appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and functional vocational evaluations. Massachusetts also has its own transition law. It's called Chapter 688, and that requires the school to make a referral to the adult service agency that may serve the student after the special ed eligibility ends. For the students that we are talking about now, the referral would likely be to DDS. Usually around the student's 21st birthday, DDS will work with you, your student, and the school to develop an individual transition plan, an ITP, which describes the types of programs and supports that the student will need when he or she leaves special ed and enters the adult world. The ITP is a separate document from the transition planning form. The transition planning form must be done when the student turns 14. I would suggest making sure your student's IEP and transition planning form address ADLs, hygiene, self-care, other things related to that, and other skills needed for things such as shopping, maybe money handling, or volunteer or other employment options. These are skills that the school needs to be working on. Continue to address any behavioral concerns as well as communication needs. Everything I've mentioned so far is key to helping the student access the community as much as possible and be as independent as possible, which is all part of transition. The school needs to be assisting in helping the student generalize these skills across all environments. That includes the classroom, elsewhere in the school, at home, and in the community. I'd recommend continuing to do all relevant evaluations such as occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, functional behavioral assessments, assistive technology, and also to seek out transition age assessments as well that will assist your student with the functional or vocational, that can assess the functional vocational skills. Some teachers put together what's sometimes called an All About Me book. It's a student portfolio for students as they approach 22. I suggest making sure this is as specific as possible about your child's needs as well as their preferences and interests. This can be a tool for the transition to adult and or residential programming. It's a really useful tool to engage in actual person-centered planning as well. You could try to get it formalized in some way in the IEP through either the vision statement, parent concerns, or the additional information sections, as well as trying to utilize the transition planning form. Some other things to consider. At 18, you could be starting to help your son or daughter apply for Social Security insurance, SSI. If a person's eligible for SSI, they're eligible for Mass Health. These issues can get very complicated, for example, around asset limits for SSI. So I'd consult an attorney or a financial planner or advisor if you feel that that's best. If your student uses a communication device or system, a voice output switch, any assistive technology or mobility aids, know who's paying for this. If you have not paid for it yourself or through your insurance and instead the school has paid for it, it's going to stay with the school when the student transitions to adult services. If the school is paying for it, you need to start figuring this out with your insurance company to purchase the device so that, for example, your student does not start adult programming without their communication system in place. This process can take a long time, several months, maybe even a year, working with your insurance company. Regarding special ed placement and programming, make sure that you have your student in a school program where they're really getting out into the community, whether that's for shopping, going out to eat, volunteer opportunities, anything like that. It's part of transition services, but it's also very important for possible future providers of adult programming to see the full scale of your students' abilities as well as their preferences and your students and yours expectations for community inclusion. By 18, you should be dealing with eligibility for adult services from DDS. The Chapter 688 referral that I talked about before, it's just that, it's a referral. It is not a determination from DDS that your child is eligible for adult services. Eligibility is not automatic, even if your son or daughter has very significant needs or if they receive services through DDS as a minor child. For folks on the autism spectrum who have significant scatter in their testing, particularly in the IQ testing, the eligibility process can be very difficult. If your son or daughter is found eligible for DDS adult services, please keep in mind that that does not mean that you will get all the services that you want for your child or that you feel your child needs. Unlike special ed services, there's no entitlement to DDS services unless you're a specific class member, such as a Boulay or Ritchie class member. DDS services depend on its funding allocation from the state legislature each year. Ineligibility determinations and determinations around services that are going to be provided, these are all appealable decisions. When considering programming options for your son or daughter in the adult DDS world, explore programming through all funding options. I'll briefly describe a few of those. DDS provides services that are solely state funded. The continued provision of these services is, as I mentioned before, dependent upon funding by the legislature of DDS's budget each year. DDS also has another type of funding. They have 3 Mass Health waivers that are DDS waivers through Mass Health. There's the Adult Support Waiver, the Community Living Waiver, and Adult Residential Waiver. There are a limited number of these waivers. Finally, there's Mass Health funded day habilitation services, and that's often where many folks in the population that we're talking about, many folks end up there for their adult day programming services. Under the Medicaid state plan, these day habs they're not really part of the DDS budget, and if they're part of the Mass Health budget, if Mass Health finds your child eligible for this service, the service is essentially an entitlement. As I mentioned, day hab is very common service provided for this population. Whether it's day hab or other day programming, make sure to visit and observe the proposed programs and ask that your son or daughter visit as well. You want to see staff interact with your son or daughter, and you want to see your son or daughter interact with the staff. Make sure to consult with various people of all professional levels, because turnover is going to be an issue. Just make sure you're talking to all sorts of different people, because the person you spoke with on one visit may not be there a year or two later when your child attends the program. As with all programs, some day habs are better than others, and some do a better job than others with getting folks into the community to participate in various habilitative, volunteer, or social activities. Please keep in mind that as a person with a disability, your son or daughter is going to have a right under the Americans with Disabilities Act to receive services in the most integrated and least segregated environment possible. Well before your child is 22, I'd suggest exploring living arrangements and residential options, even if at this time you're planning to have your son or daughter at home with you for the near future. You need to really start thinking long term. Are there ways you could use a Section 8 voucher to address a living arrangement? Could a shared living or supported living arrangement work for your son or daughter? If you're considering a group home setting, be aware that there is often a very long wait for such residential placements. So put some thought into when you want to make the request for this service if you are going to think that that's an option you want to choose either now or down the road. Another option is Mass Health funded adult foster care. This can either be an out-of-home placement with a foster family or a placement in your family home with a designated and approved adult foster care caregiver. Please keep in mind that the person who is the designated caregiver cannot also be the person's guardian. So if you're going to have this service in your home and there's two parents available, one parent usually remains the guardian and one parent may be the designated caregiver for this program. This is a brief and certainly non-exhaustive discussion of some residential options meant just to raise your awareness and raise some issues. There's plenty of resources and materials out there through the ARC and Massachusetts Families Organizing for Change, just to name a couple. You may also want to consider working with a financial planner or an attorney to address some of these life planning issues. One final thing I want to talk about is that at 18, your son or daughter is legally emancipated and a legal adult. Regardless of the level of disability, you are, for example, no longer entitled to make educational decisions for your child. You will need to execute a delegation of educational decision-making authority form if you or your student want you to remain involved. This form would allow you to choose shared decision-making with your student if your student is able to do so, or there can be a full delegation completely to the parents. You may also want to consider the range of options regarding guardianship. There's limited guardianships and full guardianships, as well as other less intrusive options such as conservatorships, durable power of attorney, trustee involvement, representative payee for SSI, or Health Care Proxy. So that's all I have. Thank you for watching, and I wish you and your son or daughter the best of luck in the transition planning process.